Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Lewis Too Much Analyzes Comics. We're going to be continuing to look at The Question by Denny O'Neil and Dennis Cowan. Now, if you watched my last video, which I recommend you watch all my videos, please. If you watched my last video, then you'll know that I encountered my first two issues of The Question that I actually didn't enjoy. And it kind of took me by surprise because I haven't actually read The Question in several years. I originally read it back in my 20s, and I remember loving the series in its totality, but I didn't really remember the specifics of every individual issue, and so I was a little bit surprised by the fact that I didn't like those two issues, and it was a little disappointing because I didn't create this channel to talk about comics that I don't like. I created this channel to talk about comics that I do like. I wanted to create a channel where I take comics that I think are good, that are trying to say something, that have ideas woven into them, and I want to kind of like unpack those ideas, wrestle with those ideas, even talk about how those ideas apply to my life or to the lives of prototypical Americans, or I guess if there's people in other countries watching this, then to anywhere in the world, ideas that apply to the human condition. And so that's what I wanted the channel to be about. So I didn't want to make a channel where I roast comics. There's plenty of channels that do that, and I like some of those channels. There's nothing wrong with doing that, but it's just not what I wanted to do. I wanted to have like a very positive focused channel where I talk about things that I like. And so I was a little scared because, again, see, since I haven't read The Question, I don't actually know in a while. I don't actually know what's coming next. Each time that I do a video, I read up to that point. I take notes and all of that kind of stuff, and then I create the video, and then I read the next issue or arc or whatever the case may be. So I don't actually know what's coming next, and so I was a little worried that I wouldn't like the next issue too, and then I'd have a sequence of videos where I'm having to like talk about how I don't like something that Denny O'Neil wrote when I love Denny O'Neil. But thankfully, that wasn't the case. The series returns to form, at least in my estimation, and goes back to doing what I like it to do, which is deal with like a philosophical issue, revolve the issue around a philosophical issue, and then like make all the characters essentially mouthpieces for different perspectives and have them work things out in a very Dostoevsky sort of way. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the issue, that introduction aside. So the issue revolves around a character that we've been introduced to in the past, who goes by the name of Junior. Junior is the son of a father who is an assassin, and he's not that sort of glamorous assassin that you see in a movie like Assassins with Sylvester Stallone and Antonio Banderas, where both of them are like in their cool suits and everything like that. Like this, they're not that kind of assassin. They're very low end assassins. So essentially, we're introduced to them back in a previous issue, and we're introduced to them. They've been hired to build a bomb, like a homemade bomb, and then put it on the bottom of a school bus filled with kids. So this is the sort of assassin family that we're dealing with. Now the father, he's a gentleman named Musto, and he's kind of like an old school. The best. I'm not sure if there's any specific ethnicity that's intended to be implied, but I view him as kind of like an old school, like Italian, or at the very least Latin sort of father, where he's very masculine. He embodies that like kind of traditional masculine sort of mentality, and he has two sons. One who is very much like him, very masculine, and then he has another son who's a little bit more delicate and dainty, a little more feminine in his personality. It's very much the setup that you see in the biblical story of Esau and Jacob, where Esau is his father's favorite because he's a hunter and he goes out into nature and he's adventurous and he he hunts down animals and brings them back so that his father can enjoy the food, while his son Jacob is a mama's boy. He's very delicate and a homebody, and um, a very crafty sort of individual. Um, and except that in this case, in the biblical story, Jacob actually has a mother figure who loves him. He is actually her favorite. In this situation, there is no mother figure, and so all that you have is essentially the father being disappointed in the son, Junior, and Junior having to essentially live within that situation where his father is constantly disappointed in him and constantly berating him because he's disappointed. And it's not helped by the fact that Junior has kind of Charlie Brown syndrome, where everything that he touches, he screws it up. And it's partially because he's always trying to please his father, right? Because as sons, that's something that's deep within us, right? We want the acceptance of our father, so we want to do whatever it takes to make our father proud of us. Well, in Junior's case, he's trying to learn the family business, trying to be an assassin, but every time that he goes to do something to please his father, he ends up screwing it up, and only damaging his father's uh, his father's perspective on him even more. And so he lives in this constant state of like trying to please his father, ruining the situation, trying to please his father, ruining the situation, his father being more disappointed in him each and every time. And so this cycle of internal abuse where he's constantly being rejected, he feels like he's never worthy, drives him so crazy that he actually takes a vial of acid and pours it on his own face and disfigures his face because of the fact that his father's always calling him dainty and delicate and pretty and all that kind of stuff. He thinks, well, if I just disfigure my face, I keep screwing up when I try and do a task, but maybe if I disfigure my face and I don't look so delicate, then my dad will accept me. Obviously, that's not the case. And so what ends up happening back in those issues is Musto is hired to kill this man, and his son Junior actually wants to beat him to the punch so that he can prove himself. But he ends up going to the house of this person that they're trying to kill, and in the process of him trying to kill the man, he and the man end up striking up a conversation where the man actually discusses his relationship with his own son and how disappointed he is in how he fathered the son, and so Junior ends up connecting with the man, because they discuss father and son relationships, and so he decides actually to protect the man from danger, and so his father ends up coming in to try and kill the man, and Junior actually shoots his own father, trying to protect the victim, and so that issue ends in that moment, but this issue that we're going to talk about today picks up from that end point there. And so this is Junior right here telling his father, "Do you love me now?" Because he's all disfigured, and so his father is lying on the ground bleeding, and he's asking him, "Hey, Dad, look what I did to myself for you. Do you love me now?" Now his father is in no position to respond because he's just been shot by his own son, and so the question approaches the scene, and he recognizes Musto on the ground, but he asks the disfigured man, "Hey, who are you?" And he tells him, "I'm this man's son." And so the question actually takes his coat off and wraps it around the man to protect him, to keep him from dying, and Junior tells the question, "Why are you doing that? If the situations were reversed, he would be laughing at you as you die. Like he wouldn't think twice about letting you expire." And the question ends up telling him something very wise, which is, "I'm glad that I'm not him." And that's actually something to meditate on for those of us who are concerned with the fact that there are evil people in the world who are sadistic and want to harm others, and that bothers us and it keeps us up at night. The fact that there's no justice being rained upon these people. At the very least, you can take solace in the fact that them being them is actually a punishment in and of itself. Like living in the head of somebody who thinks that way is a punishment. So that's something to meditate on. But let's move on because it's not really one of the themes of the story. So the question and Junior end up talking to each other about Junior's relationship to the father. The question asks him, like, you did that to yourself to please your father, and Junior tells him yes. And then Junior asks the question. Oh, well, actually, the question ends up telling Junior, that's funny because I actually don't know my parents at all. I never met them. I grew up in an orphanage. And Junior asks the question, is that why you have no face? Because you never knew your father. And it actually takes it gives the question pause, and he starts thinking about it. And then he ends up saying this very enigmatic thing to him, as the question is wont to do. He says, I'm wrong. You are luckier than me. And that's going to come back at the end of the issue. It's going to tie into the overall theme of the story. All right. So that scene takes place back, in an earlier, following an earlier comic. We're now transported to the present. And what's going on is Junior, wearing bandages around his face, breaks into a hospital room and with a machine gun and threatens some surgeons. We don't know what the surgeons are doing, but he ends up telling the surgeons to keep doing what it is that they're doing. And so we find out that the surgeons were actually performing heart surgery. They were removing somebody's heart so that it would be available for a heart transplant. And so Junior tells them, to pack up the heart, put it in, a special container so that he can transport it. And then once they do that, he ends up killing all of the doctors and leaving. From there, we move on to a scene where Vic is at the news station, and his boss is yelling at him, as he usually does, because Vic is a jerk, and he wants Vic to go on an assignment that Vic does not want to go on. Now, if you watched my last video, which again, I think that you should, it's a moral imperative that you go and watch my video. If you watch my last video, then you know that Vic does periodically do things that I actually think are like messed up. And it makes perfect sense why his boss would think that Vic is a jerk, because Vic sometimes is a jerk. And so his boss, trying to punish Vic while simultaneously trying to get Vic to have a softer side to his public image, for the benefit of the news station, is trying to get Vic to go to his own high school reunion, and then do kind of like a a little fluff piece on the reunion where he talks to all the different people at the reunion, and then they do a little segment on the news about it. And Vic doesn't want to go because he did not enjoy his high school experience. He's going to explain to Tot a little bit later on that because he was an orphan, and and then he went into high school. I'm not exactly sure how that would work if you're in an orphanage, that you would go to a high school, but regardless of how that works. So he goes from the orphanage to the high school. He's a troubled kid. He always had all these like anger issues. And so he was constantly getting himself into trouble when he was in high school. All his teachers hated him because of the fact that he had all these anger issues. He's always acting out. And then everybody else hated him as well. And so he was kind of like a reject in the school. Nobody ever liked him, and he didn't really like anybody else. So he has no interest in going to this high school reunion because he doesn't want to meet these people again. He hates them. But his boss insists that he go, and basically tells him that you're going, so there's no arguing about this. This is gonna happen. So as Vic is leaving, he ends up running into this girl who, if you've forgotten about her, you cannot be faulted, because I feel like Denny O'Neil forgets about her. She's this lady that works at the TV station, and All that we know about her up until this moment is that she uh, thinks Vic Sage is attractive. She's constantly checking him out, and Vic Sage has noticed that she's checking him out, but he's never put the moves on her. Apparently, he's just been waiting for her to make the first move, and so she does here. And she ends up inviting him over to her apartment for dinner to try out some new recipe that she's going to try out. And so he agrees to have dinner with her. From there, we move back to a scene in a different hospital where Musto is actually in a bed and he is dying. And one of the cops is explaining that he actually should have died months ago, but he's a tough, jerk, and he just is clinging desperately on to life because that's what evil people do. Evil people do. And breaking into that scene comes Junior, and he shoots one of the cops and takes the other cop hostage, and he ends up saying that he wants a surgeon to be brought in, a heart surgeon to be brought in, and he's carrying the container with the heart. So his plan essentially is to save his father by providing him with this new heart. From there, we go to the date that Vic Sage is having with the girl that I don't even remember her name. And it turns out that Vic Sage thought that she was, she's inviting him to her apartment so that she was interested in, things progressing a little bit more quickly than she actually intended. And so he started putting the moves on her, and she ends up rejecting him and telling him that she's not that kind of girl, that she's not a first date sex kind of girl. You gotta wine and dine for a little bit longer than that, Vic Sage, before you can get some. And she ends up asking him to leave, which he apologizes, that he misunderstood the situation. And it's funny because her entire character arc has been her checking out Vic Sage, and the last thing that she ends up telling him is, "You're very nice, really, really very attractive." And then that's kind of the last that I think that we ever see of her. And so that's why I say that Denny, I feel like he had some kind of idea for her, but it didn't really work out in his head the way that it wanted to, and so he was like, I just need to get rid of this lady. Now, the idea of what happens here kind of ties into the theme of the story, which is rejection, because Vic Sage gets rejected by her, and the kind of the overall theme of the whole story is the Junior getting rejected by his father, and Vic Sage getting rejected by all these different people in his life. So first he gets rejected by his parents, then he gets rejected by his high school classmates and his teachers, and now he's being rejected by this woman. So in a sense, it ties into the ideas of the story, but I think it would have been a lot more powerful if this woman had an actual personality, if we actually knew who she was, rather than just some lady that thinks Vic Sage is hot. And I thought that was super funny. That's like literally her her last line to Vic Sage is, "But don't worry, you're a very attractive man." Like, okay, thanks, lady. Thanks for stopping by in the question. All right. So now we go back to the hospital where Izzy O'Toole is being brought in to, oversee what's going on, this hostage situation. And so we find out that Junior, who has demanded this surgeon, also wants the question to show up. Because he's had this weight on top of him. There's something that he wants to ask the question. And so fortunately, Izzy O'Toole, who's kind of the question's Commissioner Gordon, is, even though he doesn't really have a way of communicating with the question, he does figure out a way, but we'll get to that in a second. So before we get to that, Vic actually ends up going to his high school reunion. And while he's there, he ends up talking to a bunch of the people from his high school and filming them for, like a montage, the little fluff piece that he's doing. And afterward, he ends up realizing, like, hey, these people were kind of nice. Like, maybe I shouldn't have judged them so harshly. Maybe I shouldn't have been, worrying about coming here. Well, ultimately, like these people are pretty cool. And so he starts walking out of the school after he thinks that, and he ends up overhearing these two women talking about him and saying, this guy is just as obnoxious as ever. He's a real monster. And that gets at poor Vic, and he ends up punching a locker because of it. Uh, and so again, that theme of rejection, Vic Sage is constantly being rejected. He can connect with Junior in that. So, anyways, Izzy O'Toole ends up calling Vic Sage's news station so that way they can broadcast on the air that Junior is looking for the question. He wants the question to show up. Fortunately, of course, Vic Sage is the question, and he works at this news station, so he hears about it, and so he changes into the question and shows up to talk to Junior. And he asks Junior why it is that Junior wanted him there, and Junior tells him it's because of that question, or not that question, that thing that you told me, where you told me that I am luckier than you. And basically that's been like weighing on his head for all this time. Why would you tell me that I'm luckier than you? And the question tells him, at least you know what's messing up your head. Versus me, I didn't have any parents, so I don't know how much I can blame on someone else versus how much I have to kind of like take responsibility for myself, which is the thing that is essentially torturing Vic, right? Is that he doesn't know why people keep rejecting him. Is it because there's something inside of him that is detestable, or is it because of something that his parents did to him? Now, it's funny because, Vic is wrestling with that question, but ultimately, like, the fact that he didn't know his parents is in a sense something that his parents did to him that very possibly could have messed him up, because obviously being abandoned by your parents is just as much is something that's going to screw you up just as much as having a parent that's constantly like reinforcing how much of a failure you are, right? Because sure, you don't have the parent figure constantly telling you that, but you have it constantly ringing in your head that they abandoned you, that they tossed you out. And so, Vic might think that this guy knows better what's screwing around with him, but the reality is that these are kind of two mirror images of each other. And so Vic ends up asking him, so what's your plan here? And so the kid, Junior, he ends up saying, I told them that I'm going to kill everybody unless they do this heart transplant. And Vic Sage is like, okay, well, they're doing the heart transplant. What if it fails? Are you still going to kill everybody? Because they did do what you asked, but they didn't succeed in what you asked. And so he kind of has to think about it for a little bit. And it turns out that the father, Musto, ends up dying. The heart transplant doesn't take. So the question, and so he ends up, Junior ends up asking the doctor, why didn't the heart take? And the doctor tells him the heart, he ended up rejecting his body ended up rejecting the heart. And the kid, Junior's like, rejected? And the question says consistent to the end, right? Because the father is always rejecting. And so the question tries to talk Junior out of murdering people. He basically, like, Junior starts trying to make excuses and saying like, look, this is who I am. I'm this screwed up kid. I'm constantly rejected. I have all this psychological turmoil going on in my head. I know no other way but then to constantly hurt others. And the question tells him, you actually have a choice whether or not you want to go down that path, or if you want to go down a different path. And unfortunately, Junior decides that he wants to go down the dark path, and he kills one of the people in the room. And so the question has to disarm him and beat him up And at that point, Izzy O'Toole comes in. They arrest Junior and take him away. And so the question is is at this point left to wonder to himself, essentially what he's going to do. Um, and obviously the question has consistently chosen a different way, which is ultimately, I think, the kind of the takeaway from this story, right? Which is the question and Denny and Junior are both two peas in the same pod, right? Like they've both been rejected. But the question ends up taking that rejection, and even though it hurts him and it causes him pain, he he takes the noble path and he becomes a hero. And even though he does certain questionable things as a hero, he's still a hero. He's doing heroic things. He's helping people versus hurting people, versus letting his pain consume him and taking that pain out on the world, which he has the power to do, right? I mean, he's trained in all these different martial arts. He has the power to inflict pain, but instead of inflicting the pain that he feels, he actually goes out into the world to create a better world, one where the sort of pain that he feels can be lessened in other people, so that less people are experiencing that pain. And so he's ultimately a noble figure versus Junior, who gives in to that bitterness, to that psychological abuse cycle, and he essentially becomes the abuser, and he takes his pain out on the world, which is uh, a, obviously something that all of us need to take into consideration, all of us that have ever gone through some sort of psychological abuse. Do we want to give in to that psychological abuse and then cause that abuse in others? If you're somebody who has been abused by a parent figure or just by a loved one, or it could be something like a boss or anything, right? Like there's all kinds of people in our lives that have power over us and can abuse us and damage us. Do you want to give in to the damage and then take that damage out on the world? Or do you want to prevent that damage from happening to other people in the world? And if that's what you do with the damage that has happened to you, if you take it as a lesson of, I don't want anyone else to experience what I have experienced, then that makes you a noble hero, like the question. And so my actual moral imperative is not to watch my past videos, but to actually go out into the world and be that sort of a person. All right. I love all you guys. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.